Hello and welcome to the Mapping the Doctrine of Discovery podcast. The producers of this podcast would like to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. And now, introducing your hosts, Phil Arnold and Sandy Bigtree.
Welcome back, everyone, to Mapping the Doctrine of Discovery. My name is Philip Arnold. I'm a professor in religion and Native American Indigenous Studies and the founding director of the Scano Great Law Peace Center at Syracuse University. And I'm here with...
I'm Sandy Bigtree, a citizen of the Mohawk Nation at Akwesasne, and I was on the planning committee of the Scano Center, the founding committee. I also am on the board of the Indigenous Values Initiative, and thank you all for tuning in again.
This podcast is sponsored by Henry Luce Foundation. And today we're very fortunate to have a friend of ours, Professor Holly Rine at Moyne University, and also on the collaborative of the Scano Great Law Peace Center. Holly has been studying in the area of the Doctrine of Discovery and doing historical work locally, but I'm going to have her introduce herself to the listening public. Holly, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here. Yes, I am Holly Rine. I am an associate professor of history at Moyne College. And as Phil said, I'm also on the academic collaborative and of the Scano Center. And I'm just thrilled to be here and have this conversation. It's such a great service, I think, to so many people who just aren't as familiar with the doctrine as they should be.
Exactly where I wanted to start, Holly, because you teach at a Jesuit university, Jesuit College, Jesuit University.
College. We're still college for the moment.
Still a college, but you're D1, so I don't know, it confuses me. But yeah, so you're teaching at a Jesuit college, and interestingly enough, there's a lot of Jesuit institutions that are very interested in this legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery, perhaps more than other Catholic institutions. That's just my impression from the outside. And I know you've been working on this for a long time, but how do you approach it at a Jesuit college? How do you think your students receive this information about the Doctrine of Discovery? And I'd be just generally interested in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been at Moyne now. This is my 19th year. And I will say myself, I was really quite unfamiliar with the Doctrine of Discovery. When I came, Mary McDonald, may she rest in peace, former religion studies professor, one of your colleagues as well, really brought me in to this discussion. And so it's been a process for me as well. And through these 19 years, really discovering the students don't know the history. Very few. And as I learned it, and at a Jesuit school where we talk about social justice, I was like, well, this becomes our duty, our responsibility. If we are saying we are a Jesuit school and we are following in this history and tradition of social justice, well, what does that exactly mean before social justice became a thing?
Right.
And we have so much at Moyne that harkens back to the relationship with the Onondagas on the name Moyne. Simon Moyne as the Jesuit who came to this area. And you ask a student who Simon Moyne was, and oftentimes he founded the college in 1946. Well, no, he did not. So it really became important to me, and I'm making slow inroads into having students understand exactly what was happening here. But I was actually the first person they hired to teach Native American history at all, as well
Wow.
at Lemoyne.
Yeah.
So like I said, this the Doctrine of Discovery has become, for me, more than just this is a really interesting area to teach. This is a responsibility, um, to say if we are parts of a Jesuit tradition and part of this particular history, we need to know about it. And the students extremely receptive,
Yeah.
shocked,
Yeah.
really, when we start. So I've had opportunities. It's not college wide, but in my particular classes, we do these projects, and looking at the doctrine and looking at then Lemoyne and looking at the history, how the history's been told versus this counter narrative. And I love our students because they're like, no, we need to do these projects, and people need to know this. And they've come up with some really interesting projects with QR codes and everything, to
Wow.
help educate their peers. So I've done a project, particularly we started doing a public history program here at Lemoyne, so an introduction to public history. So I was like, well, here's our chance. So we take a look at the Doctrine of Discovery, and we take a look at this history, and I allow students to come up with their own projects. And how do you tell then incoming students about the history that they are now a part of? If you're going to say you're a Lemoyne Dolphin, you are a part of this.
Right.
And they have they've done wonderfully, from podcasts. They created their own podcast, to, like I said, tours. So you could take your phone and do the QR codes and in order to. So they have those who have been introduced to the doctrine have realized their own responsibility as a Lemoyne student.
Well,
Mm.
we live in a very vibrant part of the world. When the Jesuits came into this territory, they recorded the first histories that were written about the Haudenosaunee. And that's how England learned about the Haudenosaunee, was through what the Jesuits were writing and publishing all over Europe. And they came into this continent through the doctrine of discovery, to Christianize and install a patriarchy among a matrilineal culture, which permeated all of the Americas, frankly. So today, we still have the Onondaga Nation organized around their matrilineal clan system. Then we have this French fort that all of us were trying to work to repurpose into the telling of this history people know nothing about, as you had indicated at the beginning of this podcast. And so it was quite a venture because we had great opposition. And a lot of it was coming from Lemoyne in the beginning. They did not want us repurposing the French fort and telling a different perspective of what actually happened in Haudenosaunee territory. So you were part of this collaborative as well, but you were right in the thick of it,
Right.
in Lemoyne.
I have to say that you were kind of fearless pushing back against some of the Jesuits in your college, um, insisting that they listen rather than, sort of preach. Some colleagues in your own department. So, I mean, I think that was really a lesson for us
Yeah,
to see you take on your own institution.
brave
I
woman.
mean, yeah, and again, it was, I look at Daniel Berrigan, one of
Yeah.
the kind of the Jesuit many people are familiar with, big social activist, and one of his statements was, know where you stand and stand there.
Yeah.
So and it's been really eye-opening with these conversations, I think, as people come around. It's slow. But one of the Ignatian principles of Education is through Ignatian principles of conversation, which is to truly sit and listen. And in many respects, right, it goes back to Haudenosaunee ideas of how you come to a decision. Unfortunately, in the modern world, many in the Jesuit fold, it's, well, no, we have decisions to make, and we've got to move forward. So adopting that has been, I think, very beneficial, primarily for the students. You said, I'm not going to fight fights necessarily that I
Right, you've got to pick them.
Well, there's
Yes.
a reason the first peace council, the first peace movement in the United States occurred in Syracuse, right? And the Berrigan's were very much a part of that movement as well.
Yes.
But it's also the heart of Haudenosaunee territory,
Mhm.
the heart of the Confederacy, and spreading the great binding peace around the world. So they were definitely influenced by all of that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Very
And
connected.
when students are introduced to that concept as well. So it's like, yes, we have American democracy, because yes, I just finished teaching a class in the American Revolution. But as I come back for my Native American history class, where we're going to go deeper into, really, when we look at representative government, when we look at true ideals of democracy, you look at the Great Law of Peace, and it was done earlier. And
Yeah.
in my perspective, with the voices of women, and really kind of looking at this idea of consensus building, better. It was
Yeah.
done better. And it's, I said, students have been quite responsive when you start really looking at the evidence. And Sandy, you talked about the Jesuit Relations, and those are the sources we have, right? For historians, we need the Jesuit Relations. Those are the sources we have.
Right.
And one of the biggest challenges is teaching students how to read those sources.
Yeah.
Well, there's
I
volumes.
wanted to ask about that, because that goes right to the heart of, doing history.
Yes, right. And you can't have history without the written sources. But we do exercises, as like, if we look at these sources, the Jesuit Relations, without any kind of critical eye, oh my,
Yeah.
there's a history we cannot tell. And unfortunately, that has happened. It's like, well, here's the written sources, and we're going to take that as gospel truth. With the Jesuits, gospel truth.
Yeah.
But once we start thinking about, and students pushing, I'm like, why were they written? Who were they written for? What was
Right.
the purpose? And what is it now that we can see in these relations? So, when they talk about Moyne and his speech, when he shows up at Onondaga, and that story of him, you can just kind of see him walking around, and pronouncing in this great performance, and according to him, all the Onondagas were just applauding, and this is this is beautiful, this is wonderful, can we get enough? And to really start saying, okay, well, here's events that are happening in the world. Why might, even if we do have Onondaga approval of some of these statements, what might be going on here?
Right.
Are they really like, oh, please come and build your chapels, and and we, once you really start thinking critically, knowing more of the context, and knowing about the Great Law of Peace, and understanding then the Doctrine of Discovery, and how these ideas kind of come to take over, students get it.
Yeah.
They
They
sure
they
do.
they get it. But it is a process. And that speech that Moyne gave, and I crack up too, because we do have Simon's Pub on campus, and we
Oh.
have it's a picture painting supposed to be of Simon Moyne, and I just crack, because it kind of looks like the Marlboro Man, and I was like, we're still kind of promoting this idea, this version of the vitality, and such a charismatic figure. And he may have been, but these words are we need them. Those are our sources, but we need to be careful with how we take a look at them.
Well, yeah,
And
they have definite agenda in publishing yeah.
So they
oh,
can continue to be funded
Yeah.
by the European
ex
monarchs to
exactly.
penetrate this land. And there was only, it's not like this was the first time the Onondaga met the Jesuits. They were well
Mhm.
aware, they were north of the
St. Lawrence.
St. Lawrence, penetrating the Wendat, and they were chaining women in the forest until they would accept to take vows of Christianity and be subservient to their husbands. It was so brutal those first 30 years the Jesuits were up there. Don't think for a moment Onondaga didn't already know about this.
Oh, yeah.
So when the French fort narrative that had been teaching this community about these first relations were about the Onondaga asking them to please come and Christianize us. You can see it was pure propaganda. And
Oh,
that's the spirit in which those Jesuit relations were written. But there are little
Because
nuggets of,
because we have other evidence, of
oh,
course. We have the evidence of the land grant,
right,
essentially.
arriving with
Yeah, arriving with this land grant, uh,
oh, yeah.
a deed essentially to 600 square miles of land, which isn't in the relations, of course. That's another piece of evidence of really the doctrine of discovery. So those just a few years after Lemoyne, they're coming up and setting up shop, knowing that they're taking and appropriating land.
Yeah.
So they're the flourishes of speeches and all the good deeds that are presented in the relations are not always backed up by even the written evidence.
well, the
No.
Galatians are talking about this culture that live in peace, and they never scold their children or hit them. The men respect the women respect the men. They have plentiful gardens of food and crops, and these heathens need to understand the power of God and that they sin. These
Yeah,
people are sinners, but they don't even have a concept of sin. I mean,
those are all negatives.
this is all written in
Those
the
are all the
Yeah.
negatives of the relations. Yeah,
generations.
yeah,
And it's interesting because I think people then, become more open to these ideas. I think once what happened at Georgetown University
yeah.
Oh,
with
Right.
the selling of slaves. So they had this enslaved population. Students were just like, "What?
Yeah,
What do you mean? That can't have been social justice." It's like social justice is new,
it's new.
right?
Yeah,
I'm like, but I was like, we take a little bit closer look at what the Jesuits again were asking. It's like, okay, it's okay to sell these enslaved people to Louisiana parish plantations as long as they continue to get their catechism.
yeah. Right.
As long as the Catholic education and that the sacraments are available to them and they're going to have Catholic instruction, right? And I was like, so that the goal wasn't social justice here on earth. The goal is, yeah, we're gonna convert you and you're gonna have this wonderful experience in an afterworld you don't necessarily believe in or want.
Right.
Um, so I was like, we have to kind of take a look. Just because we talk about social justice now doesn't mean we talked about that then. So watching Georgetown really kind of deal with that.
Yeah.
Um, and then when we take a look and we see more colleges and universities focusing on their history with indigenous peoples as well, you know, students were like, okay, yeah, we are a part of something bigger here as well. That which is always a trick getting students at Lemoyne to understand that history didn't just happen elsewhere.
Hmm.
History happened here. Very significant things happen here that are very much connected. So just because it happened here doesn't mean it's insignificant.
Right.
It happened here, and it's really a crucial part of a larger picture. and we're not separate from it. So we talk about really, indigenous ideas of history are much more
Relevant.
right, relevant, right? They're part of today, as opposed to, I think, so many of, again, history happened over there or some other time, some other place. And I was like, no, now you are a part of this story. What do you do with this story? What is your role? You're a part of it now. You're not
Yeah.
just studying it. You are a part.
And it's
Now
not
you
like
have
it was
to
just in
study
the
it.
past,
No,
right?
it's relevant.
Yeah, right.
But you talk about social justice. Well, I said when the Jesuits first came into Wendat territory, they claimed they Christianized the whole nation within 30 years. And yet there were orators going to Europe critiquing the greatest thinkers in Europe at the time who professed to be practicing equality and social justice and all the things you're talking about. But they're saying you're only equal and just under the rule of your monarch. And we're kind of being fed these same narratives today. That's what Putin's, telling his people, you're all free and equal. Seriously? And we're kind of shifting in that direction ourselves in this country. So, you've got to be made aware of of the seriousness of these discussions.
And they haven't gone away. The past is not past.
Mhm.
It's present and part of our future, I think. And I mean, this is from Adam, our producer. I want to get this in because he asks, um, what does the Catholic theology of the priests who think conversion and Catholic practice of the enslaved folks was doing for them, for the priests or for the church? I think it's a good question given your comments on Georgetown, for example. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
And what does the catechism have to do with holding these people in bondage? How
yeah,
does that liberate them? It's, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, so
question, yeah.
yeah, I mean, the idea of, being held in bondage on earth,
yeah,
that's fine. And really one of the goals of the Jesuits in the 18th century, right? Martyrdom.
right,
Everybody was looking for suffering on earth for the greater good of the greater glory of God.
yeah,
Um, so again, social justice doesn't fit into that because it's better for you to die. It's better for you to be. It's okay for you to be held in bondage as long as you are um, maintaining Catholic practice and maintaining the sacraments and the priests are the ones responsible for making sure that happens, right?
right.
So the duty done.
Do you need help catching up on today's topic? Or do you want to learn more about the resources mentioned? If so, please check our website at podcast.doctrineofdiscovery.org for more information. And if you like this episode, review it on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, back to the conversation.
Yeah.
So
You were present at our conversations with David McCollum,
mhm.
Father McCollum, and at Lemoyne, and we were at it for 3 years or more, I think, with the Onondaga there at Lemoyne. And I remember one exchange where we were talking about the martyrs actually, and their names on your
Dorms.
dorms, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was Jake Edwards asked, "Well, what is a martyr?" And they explained somebody was spreading the gospel among non-Christian people, among native people. I don't think they use the word heathen to be,
No.
precise. But then Jake said, "Oh, you mean invaders?"
Yeah.
Which completely flips the script. I mean, it was just a it was a revelation to me, because, and I'm not Catholic, of course, but, but martyrs only operate in a certain kind of worldview, in a framework, right? And
Yes.
maybe a historical one, um, or, but, to me, that was a kind of revelation. It sort of quieted the room for a while, I think.
Yes, 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 it did. And I mean, I just also remember, I believe at one point, I'm not sure if it was David or someone, but just saying that they were looking for reconciliation
Oh
at this
yes,
point. And was it Jake who's like, no,
yeah,
not now, not in our lifetimes, not going to happen. It may have been Oren. I'm not, I don't, but I remember that exchange extremely well. And I talk about that with my students as well.
wow,
Right?
great,
That this is something that is not, it's not like, okay, all right, yeah, we get you. Great,
yeah,
fabulous. I understand
next,
now.
next,
Let's yeah, let's move on. And
yeah,
and that really hits home for them that they are part of this.
All right, maybe we can talk about reconciliation when we can dip a cup in any stream and drink freely from it without being poisoned.
right, and that gets to
We can
your
begin the conversation about reconciliation. There
uh,
need to be changes, right, before we can arrive at that sort of conversation.
yeah, as Adam also interjects, Oren says there can be no reconciliation when there is no point in which to which one can be conciled. Strange word, but you can't
Yeah.
be reconciled until you can be conciled.
Mm.
And to jump in there, right, what Oren is pointing out, right, is the word reconciliation is a return to when things were going good, when there was a good time. When spouses reconcile, it's recognizing the good times.
Yeah.
Where in the 500 years of history is the good times? Where is that
Yeah.
point to which one can be conciled?
Right. Sandy's point gets us kind of to this article you wrote. Look at the title page. Yes, Onondaga Lake, sacred space, contested space, and it's a remarkable piece. And I think what you're trying to do, you can tell us what you're trying to do, but from my point of view, you're trying to localize history. You're trying to give it some local importance, but also thinking about the environmental impacts and other kinds of impacts that history can tell a story or weave a story of a place. And it's difficult past in a way that helps us revisit where we are, right? Um,
Mhm.
but you tell us what you wanted to accomplish with this piece.
Yeah, there's a few things. I'm really, again, focusing on local. That yes, I want us to take a look at this bit of local history. And when we look at Onondaga Lake, right, the story of it is primarily the modern story of the pollution. It's like, well, there's more to it as
Yeah,
well. And if we want to look, if we want to get to the point of, as Sandy said, it'd be great if we could actually, dip our cups in there. It'd be great if you could dip your toe in there. I
right.
mean, at this point in time, right?
Black. Yeah.
That this, it didn't have to be this way. And this is what I try to tell students with history all the time. It wasn't just a set of things that have to unfold in a particular way. We make choices. Choices were made that got us to this point. But if you look at that original history of the lake, the sacred nature of this particular place, and we as Americans talk about the importance of sacred places, and I talk about that in the article as well, right? Joe Biden talked about on January 6th with the attacks on the Capitol that a sacred place of government of founding was attacked. It's like, well, that happened here.
Yes.
That happened at Onondaga Lake. We don't recognize that, but it did. Maybe if we can recognize this at one point, this gets to the conciled part.
Right.
Maybe we can look at that bit of history and say there is another way.
Mhm.
there is another approach, and this approach may take another 400 years.
Right.
But
Well,
it is something that we can really take a look at and think about.
I think the value of from our point of view is the value of the 250 celebration next year is that we can really reassess where democracy has been inspired, and maybe think about if it's always a standard practice of the Haudenosaunee to include other non-human beings in their democratic processes, right? So this radical democratic process does have the water in it. It does have animals and trees and the land and things like that, which is something that, of course, our founding fathers completely neglected. The role of the non-human persons,
More than
and
human.
more than human. Um, and of course, women and others, but it's not finished, I guess, is what you're saying.
It's not finished, right? I mean, so we've made choices, we can continue to make choices, and we have other models to look at. Especially as you said, right? This time there's a lot of I just finished the American Revolution course, and one of the things we were talking about is the future of the American Revolution. What does this look like?
Yeah.
And students were really thoughtful about really the challenges that we're facing at this point in time. Many of them talking about environmental issues and the fear of backsliding and going right back into deregulation and what can happen to the environment. And it's like, okay, we're at this pivot point again
Mhm.
of where are we heading. And now we're in this time of social justice, where we had the late Pope actually wrote an encyclical dealing with the environment. Right. So we've switched these ideas of what land and water and the non-human animals, their value, no longer necessarily just economic to subdue the earth and but now, oh wait, we live amongst, we are part, we are responsible again, right? So I think we are at that moment, and at a Jesuit institution, I think of saying, okay, we can switch this view, and we can look back on that doctrine of discovery. We can look back at that great law of peace and that kind of that clash, really, right? You had two completely different worldviews.
Mhm.
Well, here we are at a moment we can make a decision.
Mhm.
Mm.
We can make a decision. What will those decisions be kind of moving forward as we look to the history that has informed us and informed this area? Whether we look at Onondaga Lake, whether we look at the Sullivan Clinton campaigns during the American Revolution, which again comes as a shock to a lot of students.
Mm.
They don't know it.
Yeah.
That George Washington ordered this attack into the area. That really the goal was, of course, to eliminate the Haudenosaunee and to take that land and those resources. It's like, okay, we're at a moment. What do we
Mm.
do with that? And I think it's a really both exciting and fearful time.
Well, both are at play. It is fearful and it is exciting. And, you talk about, Onondaga Lake, let's talk about the Erie Canal,
Hmm.
our first encounter where we're going to share in the river of life, the two-row wampum, the Haudenosaunee present to the Dutch. We're going to share in the river of life down parallel paths and not interfere with one another. Well, you have to first determine your perspective of life. Is it about your relationship with the natural world as the Haudenosaunee see it, or is this life the spirit of an economic growth right through a New York State with what was to follow, and that's the Erie Canal. It's an
Hmm.
artificial waterway. We're We're hearing talk right now about Micron associating with being the present day Erie Canal of New York State.
Right.
And that's a flag. That is terrifying.
Yes.
Knowing what the Erie Canal did to the Haudenosaunee throughout this land, disrupting this whole ecological system.
And
There is
with Micron
and terror. We're right at that moment. You're
Yeah.
right.
and with Micron and again, why are they looking here? It's water resources.
Water.
Yeah.
They
Fresh
want,
water.
and that's a fun thing with students as well. It's like we don't understand like the crucial nature of what, because we have so much of it here.
Right.
Right. I mean, half the time I moved to Syracuse and there's a hole in my basement. I was like, why is there a hole in the floor of my basement? I'd never seen that before. Right. And they're like, oh, then Syracuse, that's the difference between having a basement or or a pool.
Or a lake.
Yes, in your house. And I was like, so that role of water, which again, I mean, so the past week it hasn't stopped, right?
Mm.
In so much of the world, that is such a focal point where it's not here in the same way, right? But Micron is here because of the water. What is that going to do as well? So yeah, Sandy, that whole idea of the Erie Canal, yes, this is going to be a new economic revolution for this area. They're here because of the water resources. The Jesuits were really interested in the salt.
Yeah.
So how do we
and
talk about sacred space?
and here we go again. What choices, and even with the aquarium, which is just continues to, I was like, we're going to build an aquarium. I was like, what, to show what the fish who should have been living in the lake look like?
Right.
This is, what are the choices that we make?
No, I mean, I think what you've done in this article is set up, our thinking about the long duration, right?
Right.
The long duration of Onondaga Lake, from what we call prehistory, although it's just history. I mean, it's just history. I mean, because the Onondaga are there and they're telling us about this history. And that's what we were trying to do at the Scano Center, is trying to give people a sense of values before we can, so that it can set up a conversation, right? Set up our students to think about what will be our future.
And to leave with a critical eye about what's
Yes.
happening around them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, that is so from, how do we read the sources? What, everything. Yes, you have to ask those questions, and you have to be open-minded. Like I said, when I got here in 2006, I wasn't that familiar with the doctrine of discovery. And it was me sitting and listening, just shutting my mouth. And in conversation with the Onondagas, I took that Jesuit principle of listen. Don't come to conclusions until you listen and learn. And I listened, and I think I learned quite a bit. And it's gotten me to right. And this was after my PhD, right? I got my PhD. I know it all, right? Woohoo! God, no. And that's another thing I hope my students really get out of that, is that, this is a continuing. I'm going to teach you things that are going to be challenged and should be challenged. And you don't just sit there and say, well, Dr. Rine said that, therefore it's true. No.
No, they don't do that anymore. They don't take it. They don't take what you say as gospel.
At Moyne, they still kind of do. I told them
Do
I was
they
going to
really?
start
Oh.
lying one day
Oh,
just
wow.
to see
Yeah,
what happens.
just use the strategy of the Jesuits, 17th century Jesuit. But I mean, of course, I mean, I was always interested, and I have a similar kind of history to yours, and in that, I really started learning about the doctrine of discovery in the early 2000s, we'll say around 2004 5, when we started to get to know Steve Newcomb, for example, and his work. But of course, before, I was always interested. If you're teaching Native America, you're always aware of the contact situation, right? It might be manifest destiny, it might be just outright colonialism or conquest or the Indian Wars or whatever you're, whatever wherever you are in that kind of history. But the doctrine of discovery as I guess maybe as a category sort of encapsulates that whole kind of mass of that kind of mythology that has driven
Hmm.
the American culture so much. But I mean, that's the way I think about it. That I've always kind of been working on it, but then, this idea of the doctrine of discovery and the specificity of the documents, coming from the 15th century or earlier, just that kind of galvanizes everything.
Yes, and to look at really how that continues then, right? Through areas that students are more familiar with.
Yeah,
Um like Cherokee removal and
right,
the removal period and the court cases, right?
right,
That students are vaguely familiar. This kind of happened, but to really look into that idea of the legal march here, right? So we talk about the United States, we're a country of laws. Well, where do these laws then, come from? And this was one part of my learning process. So yeah, I knew Johnson v. McIntosh. I knew about all of these things. I'm like, oh wait, this is a continuation of that doctrine then.
yeah,
That legal, right? I win because it's the law. I
yeah,
win because it's the legal document that says I own this land. And to say that in US law that came from canon law, that came from the Pope, which at the time was the law, right? But
right,
then how it moves into US law. So we really view that all the way up to, of course, the Cheryl case, the Cheryl Oneida case. And
yeah,
students are blown away when they not only read that, but that footnote and talking about basically that the Oneidas, it's too late for them to claim the land. And it's kind of, I wish I had the quote in front of me, but that it,
Latches,
yeah.
what's that?
the latches, right?
Been
Right?
too long.
Yeah.
That this is basically part of how it's been done. This is the law. This is the
Yeah.
doctrine of discovery. And then students realize that was Ruth Bader Ginsburg
Right.
who wrote it, and they're like, "What?
What?
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 Yeah.
No!" It's like this becomes that crucial element then of that legal nature, which then gets us back to the great law of peace, which isn't
Right.
going to necessarily be recognized as law.
I mean,
Yes, right.
Adam has it here. Doctrine of discovery, fee title to the lands occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign. First, the discovering European nation, and later the original states, and then the United States. That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, first
Yes.
footnote. So yeah, I mean, and for me in religion, right? I mean, religion, we talk about sacred places all the time. We talk about all of these theological elements, but the doctrine of discovery brings together religion with
Mm-hmm.
law,
Yep.
with textual exegesis, historical work. It brings together all these different people, environmentalists, indigenous peoples. It seems to me it has a galvanizing effect on bringing all kinds of different academics together with indigenous people around a kind of shared concern. And that's what I think
Mm-hmm.
the power of this is really, and why this is mapping the doctrine of discovery, because just all over the place, it goes
Yes.
to so many different areas.
It's a way through it. I mean,
Yeah,
being an academic, Indigenous people have held such distrust because history's been written through the doctrine of discovery and taking control of these narratives and manipulating the future. So you talk about experts and how academics are not so much seen as the definitive experts anymore, because when you incorporate the doctrine of discovery into interpreting these ancient texts and primary sources, you're beginning to see a fault line there that's
Right.
cracking open.
Yeah.
So you have to question the experts you had to study to become, you know, a professor, right?
Mhm.
And everybody,
So,
it's all beginning to erode, and it's a good thing because it has to be reconstructed.
Mhm.
You do want people having a critical mind. Nobody knows the definitive truth here of what's been recorded.
yeah, and that's really one of the things I push with my students. Is like in the classes where I'm not so concerned about the facts that you know when you
Yeah.
come out, but I want you to look at those facts that are presented to you, the history that's presented to you, and just stop, take a moment, and really think and come up with your own questions.
Right.
So a lot of times it's like, I don't want to know what this, I want to know what your questions are
Yeah.
about
Mm.
the source. I want to know what it is that you see that makes you either say, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "Wait a second, time out. This sounds wrong." It's
Right.
okay for you to say this sounds wrong and ask that question.
Yeah.
Um, and like that's the real key. And it's a hard thing for students to learn
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
to
the relationship becomes more collaborative between
Exactly.
the professor and the student.
Yeah.
yes.
It's more regenerative.
Yeah, and I mean, also we have other texts as well. We have
Mhm.
wampum belts, for example.
Yep.
You have the Hiawatha belt in your article. You
Yep.
discuss the founding of the League and the Confederacy, but we also have the Remembrance Belt, which for the Onondaga anyway details that relationship between the Haudenosaunee and the Onondaga and the Jesuits in the
Mhm.
17th century. But as far as I know, nobody's really sort of put that down in a way. I mean, it's been discussed, but a wampum belt functions fundamentally differently than a text.
Yeah.
So, so it becomes a much more collaborative exercise to be able to interpret like a
Mhm.
wampum belt or to have these kind of conversations of what really happened there. Have, for example, you know, Oren Lyons talking about that remembrance belt.
Mhm.
And he did it at Lemoyne, as I recall,
Mhm.
in a presentation there, talking about the two row, talking about these wampum belts that then became, it's a kind of revelation for people doing this history, gives them another angle.
And really, and that's one of the things I use the wampum belts in teaching. And because most of the students are like, "Oh, it's just like a game of telephone or whatever." I'm like, "No,
Exactly.
Oh,
no." And they're like, "Well, things change." I was like, to try to get them to understand, and again, that's the present nature of history. It's like there is an understanding. This isn't just the documents that we look at in the archives. This is a living piece of understanding that goes beyond, in many respects, how we look at written sources.
mm,
Yeah.
So it's really difficult. I mean, it was difficult for me to wrap my head around. And it can be really challenging for them, but in the end, they at least understand it to the point of how these visual element, the wampum belts, or if we're looking at Lakota winter counts, and how we understand these, and how they really continue to live.
Right.
um it's yeah, it's one of the big challenges. And but students, again,
mm.
I love them when they're really open, when they're open to those ideas. And the true row is, yeah, once they see that, and also you said the Treaty of Canandaigua and the Washington Belt there, that that blows their minds in ways of like, wait, you had Washington try to destroy the
Yeah.
Haudenosaunee, and now there's a treaty, and how does all this how does all this go together? And I was like, and not only is there this treaty, but every November 11th, go to Canandaigua. Go to Canandaigua. Again, it's alive. It is not in the past. This is a crucial element of present identity as well.
Yeah, it's
Well,
thrilling. It's really thrilling.
it's a
It
different
is.
way of remembrance.
Yeah.
When
Mhm.
history is more factual and there's like all these dates and linear way of thinking, but the
Yeah,
Haudenosaunee don't think that way. It's
right.
not relational. Sid says you cannot experience peace unless you're in proper relationship with the natural world. This is all about relationships. The two-row is about relationships. The Canandaigua Treaty is about relationships. And when those are a way of living, you do remember those
Yep.
relationships better than you would remember written facts.
Yeah.
Also,
And
I mean, going back to your article, just, also they're in the land, right? All those, what, remembrances and the wampum belts are connected to the lake or to, these places, right? And that's another way that they remember,
Yeah.
really literally putting it together.
So much is encoded in the natural world
Right.
when this plant goes to seed or when the fish, are
Mhm.
jumping in their streams.
Yeah.
It all triggers other events that are going to happen. It's all relational. It's a different way of relating to the world.
Hmm.
very, very much so. Whereas the doctrine of discovery, the relationship isn't a collaborative one; it is a power relationship, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which just made me think. It reminded me of a quote from Theda Purdue, a scholar of Cherokee history, when she talked about uh, where the Christians were kicked out of their Garden of Eden, the Cherokees lived in theirs.
Mm.
So it's like you had this garden, this relationship, this, that is the scene of destruction for Christianity,
I know.
Judeo-Christian, but for Cherokees, and we can apply this, of course, to the Haudenosaunee. She focused specifically on Cherokees, but right, they lived in theirs, and it's and that same kind of understanding of place and relationship, and it's a completely different way of looking at things, um, which again, gives us that opportunity
Yeah.
to say there's a different way. It doesn't have to be the exact same way, but there is a different way. History does not have to unfold
Right.
in this one linear, these are what the documents say, therefore this is how it's going to happen.
Yeah.
um so
Well, that's a wonderful place to conclude our conversation today. I want to thank you, Holly, for being with us. This was really delightful, long overdue, I would say. So thanks
my
very
my
much.
pleasure.
Yes,
This
Yeah,
was
thank
a lot of
you.
fun.
yeah, it was.
The producers of this podcast were Adam DJ Brett and Jordan Lawn Cologne. Our intro and outro is Social Dancing Music by Oris Edwards and Regis Cook. This podcast is funded in collaboration with the Henry Luce Foundation, Syracuse University, and Hendricks Chapel, and the Indigenous Values Initiative. If you like this episode, please check out our website and make sure to subscribe.